So it's been almost a year, and it's already re-election time. It happens really fast, right?
Yeah.
So what's that like?
Well, I mean, it's in terms of the timing, it's definitely a nonstop kind of pace. As soon as you start feeling like we're getting our sea legs a little bit, it's time for re-election season, which is just a reality of Congress. But it's really been such an incredible privilege and blessing of a lifetime, really, to be able to serve my district and my community here.
You mentioned your personal growth. Tell us a little bit about what that looks like for you.
Yeah, well, I mean, last February I was bartending in Union Square, and now, of course, so much has happened since then. I was elected to represent my 14th district of New York in Bronx and Queens, and also coming in as the youngest woman to be elected to Congress to do so. There was so much, and then on top of all of the responsibilities in Congress, the amount of attention that the seat has gotten and my service has gotten has almost been like a second job on top of all of that.
Managing the fact that you now have this huge profile.
Yeah, and thinking that, you know, what I wear or how my hair gets cut in a given day adds a certain level of scrutiny. But I think it's also forced me to be better in a way that I never imagined I almost could be. And, you know, pushing that growth, all of those challenges that we have individually, they force us all to step up.
Is there a downside to the sort of sudden celebrity that you've achieved?
Yeah. You know, I think sometimes a lot of people think of the upside, but it's definitely a lot of stress, especially if it's not something that you're used to. This isn't something that I kind of eased into. It was almost like a light flipped or a light switched, and all of a sudden all of this attention came. And so there's a lot of stress that comes from that, especially if you're not used to it. And so personally it definitely takes a toll, but politically sometimes it does too, where it's every small thing you do gets a much added level of scrutiny, which sometimes I see other colleagues, they can get away with things that I would never be able to. But I think it's, all in all, it's been still a huge blessing.
It comes with a lot of power. You obviously have a lot of influence. Is there a downside with your constituents that this sort of fame that you've achieved might make people feel like you're not as connected with them, that you're not as in it with them?
Well, thankfully, I'm home all the time, so I don't feel like my constituents, and I don't feel like my neighbors think that I'm not around or not connected. But there's always definitely this push and pull of when you have a national spotlight. It's, you know, people across the country think that I'm their congresswoman, but ultimately I'm the congresswoman for my community here in the Bronx and Queens. So there's this balance that we have to strike between serving the country and serving our backyard. But I spend, you know, my time here at home, and I'm very lucky. I don't have to fly as much across the country to do fundraisers or anything like that. I'm right here.
I was at your rally with Senator Sanders a couple of Saturdays ago. Huge turnout, a beautiful day. You talked a little bit about how, I won't get your quote right, but it was something about how the halls of Congress are no joke.
Yeah.
You talked about feeling like you were in a vice.
Yeah.
And that there's all this pressure to ignore the working class person. Can you elaborate a little bit on what you mean, or give us an example of what that was?
I think it was one of the more shocking aspects when I got to DC. I think there's this perception that DC can be a bubble and that there's this big disconnect, which all of those things are true, but to actually see how it manifests can be really shocking. A lot of it isn't even just about policy, but it's about process. Is that you'll find out that something is getting voted on 48 hours ahead of time, and it's 1,000 pages long, and you have to find these tiny provisions that are tucked in that may or may not have been put there by a lobbyist group or a special interest. And so sometimes it's like a race against time, and it can be overwhelming in trying to find all of these things while also advancing real legislation that impacts people's lives. And so it can be really overwhelming at first.
I've lost count of how many opponents you have. Is it still 11? Have you counted recently?
I think, but I lose count as well.
Is it 11?
I think it's around 11 total, yeah.
And are you committing to debate your opponents?
Yes, but I think we need to get through to like primary and general election season. I don't think I'd debate obviously there's so many, so I don't think I'd debate on 20 people, but I think to an extent where it's purposeful to our community, like absolutely.
But given the way Joe Crowley lost, right?
Yeah.
Not showing up at a debate, right. You certainly can't be the person who says you're not going to debate.
No, exactly. And I believe in I believe in running and earning my seat every single time. I don't think we're entitled to re-election.
Were you supporting Senator Sanders from the very beginning this year, or was there a period of time earlier in this cycle where you were undecided?
Well, I think there was definitely a period of time where it was where I was just kind of weighing the entire field. I think like every American should. We have to kind of revisit and reassess. So it was definitely a conversation about how are we not just going to run the same way we did in 2016, but how do we run a new campaign every single time? And I hold myself to that same standard as well.
Did you ever give Mayor de Blasio's candidacy any serious thought?
That's a good question. I think
no.
I think the mayor is a really strong progressive. For me, I feel like my options were between maybe 2 to 3 candidates and what I was looking for, and I think Bernie's a really special guy, and so I think his candidacy has always been a very special one to me.
Why do you think de Blasio's campaign didn't gain any traction? I mean, he supports a lot of the same policies that you support.
Yeah, I'm not sure. I wasn't on the inside of the mayor's campaign, so I'm sure.
You watch it from the outside.
Yeah, so I think on the outside, you always need a strategy when you're running, right? You need to have who your base is in mind. So it's possible that the base he was going after was already kind of Bernie's base or someone else's base. Campaigns are tough, and sometimes it's just, as the mayor said, sometimes it's just, not the right time, but it could be a good time at another juncture.
Was there a conversation between you and the fellow congresswomen in the so-called squad? I don't know how you feel about that term. Is that do you not like that term, the squad?
I don't dislike it. We sometimes kind of internally joke that like we're more like the Spice Girls. That's what Ayanna likes to say, than the squad, because we're not clones, right? We're sisters. We're not clones, and so we're independent and we talk to each other, but we also lean on each other a lot emotionally. And like I said, Congress is no joke, and having that kind of friendship is really important.
I see that Ayanna Pressley backed Elizabeth Warren yesterday. Well, did you guys discuss that first to try to make a strategic decision that the squad members wouldn't have all their eggs in one basket?
No, we don't make decisions as kind of a collective. We come to each of these conclusions individually, but we do kind of inform each other, let each other know where we're at, but we don't say like, we don't get into a room and say the squad is going to do this.
Right. You don't wear costumes and superhero costumes. Let's talk about Facebook and political ads a little bit. So Mark Zuckerberg, who you grilled recently, said he has no intention of changing Facebook's policy on political ads, but he is open to the idea of suggestions or considering suggestions about this micro-targeting policy. Twitter went in a different direction. Can you just lay it out for the viewer. Are you concerned about political ads being on these platforms, or just about the accuracy or the ability to spread disinformation?
So I'm concerned first and foremost with disinformation. That's my primary concern with political ads on social media in 2020. I don't believe that they should or need to be banned outright, but I do think that if a platform is not willing to invest in basic fact-checking, or if they're going to allow their platform to be abused for discriminatory policies, then they shouldn't be running these types of ads at all.
What do you think was the outcome of that sort of widely played exchange between you and Zuckerberg? Do you think it resulted in other companies taking steps, and did Zuckerberg not go far enough?
I don't think it's a coincidence that Twitter announced that they were going to be pulling political ads the following week. I think that line of questioning really exposed the lack of thought and the amount of carelessness that Facebook is really engaged in approaching its political ad policy. A lot of people don't know that Facebook's platform, the micro-targeting that it's involved, has allowed for housing discrimination. It's allowed for people to advertise for apartments and specifically say that they can exclude Black users of Facebook or Latino users of Facebook. And so these are hugely problematic, and so I think that I don't think it's a coincidence that we're having this conversation right after this hearing.
Some have suggested that the office of mayor would be a good job for you to run for, to try to really implement some of these policies that you care about on the ground.
Yeah.
So is this something that you have actually thought about doing?
I have not thought about running for mayor. I think that first and foremost, I think there are some great folks who are emerging as candidates now.
Who do you like?
It's also, well, I haven't thought about it very early, but I just think that, first of all, I think I've got some ways to go in Congress before I try to get another job. But I do think that, being mayor of New York City, I think, is one of the hardest jobs in the world, and for a large amount of reasons. You have to run a city that is as large as some other states, or as large as some other countries even, and with millions and millions of people, but you don't necessarily have the complete backing of Albany, so your hands are tied in certain ways.
Even the partial backing of Albany. Have you not watched the mayor and the governor going at it?
Yeah, exactly. And so depending on who you are as mayor and depending who the governor is, that's not a guarantee.
What kind of job do you think Mayor de Blasio has done?
I think Mayor de Blasio has had some really great wins in terms of pre-K work, universal pre-K, in terms of ending stop and frisk. But we continue to have some challenges as a city, but that's not just on the mayor's shoulders. It's on all of us, because the city is becoming less affordable by the day, and it's becoming harder and harder for working people to live here. And so we need to do a lot when it comes to rent, when it comes to affordable housing, when it comes to the housing crisis. There's so much work to be done.
Let's talk about some of the police protests that happened in the recent weeks, because you weighed in on them. You expressed your solidarity with anti-police demonstrators in Brooklyn last weekend. You said arresting people who can't afford a $2.75 fare makes no one safer and destabilizes our community. What about the people who believe that fare beating and failure to arrest people for it destabilizes our transportation system?
Yeah, well, for me, first and foremost, it's not in anti-police position, because I don't think that it's right to put police in the position of having to arrest folks that can't afford $2.75 to begin with. A lot of times, I don't think there's a lot of folks that want to be out there arresting teenagers and doing that kind of stuff. So I think when it comes to the actual fare beating and things like that, it's a question of resources. And so a lot of folks who are engaged in this behavior, sometimes they're young, sometimes they're teenagers, and if we're going to be spending hundreds of thousands, if not millions of dollars in in enforcing and cracking down on some of these issues, then why don't we just put a couple extra bucks on a kid's MetroCard to let them afford it and not have to get tangled up in our criminal justice system? Because once you get tangled up in that system, it becomes so hard. It becomes a challenge for the rest of your life.
So you're talking about students, kids who get MetroCards already because they're in high school.
Right, and you know, when you actually look at what's going on, you break it down by the issue. And if it's an affordability issue, then you know, there's a lot of folks that I think we can work on. Why MetroCard fares have been going up at such a high rate is another question we need to be asking about. We need to be asking about why the MTA has been underfunded and why it's falling apart and why people are paying more than ever to wait longer than ever to get to work.
So for people who think that your solidarity that you expressed last week with the protesters was anti-police, are you saying now it's not, you're not anti-police?
No, it's about being anti-poverty. And I think that's really what the position is about. And criminalizing, we will never police ourselves out of poverty. We have to think about what security means, and security doesn't just mean adding many more police to our subway stations. Security means creating an environment of economic security and just a larger amount of accessibility to our public system.
We've seen some, I'm switching gears again, we've seen some unlikely friendships develop on Capitol Hill, at least in past years. I don't know what the climate is like now for this, and you can tell me, but you know, friendships like between John Boehner and President Obama, Ruth Bader Ginsburg and Scalia, Biden and McCain. What conservative or Republican friend have you made that might surprise people?
Yeah, you know, I think sometimes folks would be surprised in that being in Congress is a very stressful experience, and you kind of feel like you're in the trenches no matter what your party is. And so there are certain unique aspects to this experience, whether it's the schedule, the traveling, all this other stuff, that can yield to friendships across the aisle.
Have you made one that, at least yet?
Well, you know, I think, so for example, you know, our late chairman on Oversight, Elijah Cummings, was close friends with Mark Meadows. And I remember when I first came in, I was like, how are these two friends? They believe in totally different things. And since I've entered on that committee, I've developed a certain amount of, understanding to that friendship. So I think that he carries himself, at least in the halls of Congress, with a certain degree of respect towards others. You know, it's funny, there are other Republicans that I've developed friendships with, but they've told me that they would get in trouble if people knew that I were friends with them. So I won't out them as my friend lest they get primaried from the right.
Is that what it's come to? That's how bad the climate is?
Yeah, no, they say, they're like, listen, like, I'm looking out for you, but don't let anyone know.
There you go. What do you think about what Governor Cuomo is doing to the Working Families Party right now?
Well, I think it's wrong. You know, I may be a Democrat, but I believe that third, fourth, and fifth parties should have a robust chance in our state. And I think that...
And when the governor says, oh, it's not me, it's my representative on this panel, I'm not the one making this decision.
Well, we choose the representatives to these panels, right? And so or if, let's say, your representative makes a decision that you disagree with, you should say that you disagree with it. And so, okay, maybe someone you sent to this panel, if they truly yielded a result that you don't agree with, then maybe we should say that. I can say it. I don't agree with trying to minimize the Working Families Party. They play a really important role in our politics, and they play a really important role in our state.
Do you think it's motivated by some vindictiveness or revenge against the challenge that he faced last year?
Well, I can't speculate into the governor's motivations, and I won't, but I just think at the end of the day, trying to minimize and yield decisions that will reduce our choice in our electoral system isn't the right direction.
Before I let you go, I just want to make sure that we touch on your role in the House Oversight Committee. foreign interference in our elections and what insight you can give our viewers on the impeachment process.
Yeah, so I sit on the Oversight Committee, which is one of the few committees that were part of the private depositions, which will now go public starting next week. And so the general public, New Yorkers, will hear from the same people that we've been hearing from over the last month. And there's been a lot of misrepresentation over what this process has been. Republicans have been saying that they're not a part of it, that it's secret, and none of those things are true. Republicans have been part of these depositions every step of the way. Many of them that are saying that they weren't involved actually sit on the committee with me, so I was surprised to see them in some of these press conferences, because I was like, you were in that room with me just a few days ago.
You were also saying that you saw the Republicans being troubled by what was coming out, even though they weren't saying it publicly. Can you tell me that again? Yeah.
So I actually sat in on the Ambassador Sondland hearing, and I remember when we were pursuing, it wasn't just the testimony that he offered, but when we were pursuing lines of questioning, which Republicans and Democrats get equal time in their questioning. When they were pursuing questioning, and as we've seen this week, Sondland has revised and changed his testimony, updated it in certain ways after other witnesses have contradicted what he said. In that initial testimony, he would be saying things, and I saw Republicans, I saw Democrats, we were looking at each other saying, this isn't adding up. And I think that there's a fair amount of concern, and I think Republicans, frankly, are quite rattled over what seems to have gone on in the White House, and they're trying to figure out how to defend it, and they're trying to figure out how to excuse it, but I think that they're in big trouble. They know it.
Do you think the impeachment inquiry should be very narrowly focused simply on the events in Ukraine?
Well, I think with respect to some of the jurisdiction, for example, with the House Intelligence Committee, certain committees do have that inquiry narrowed down based on their jurisdiction, but I'm of the personal belief that we should be filing multiple articles beyond just Ukraine. I think we have very serious violations of the Emoluments Clause. I think the president using Trump Tower as a piggy bank to cash in on relationships with ambassadors and other countries and contractors is really concerning, and we shouldn't allow any president to do that.
Do you know anything about whether we're safer today from foreign interference in our elections than we were 4 years ago that you can share with us?
I don't think we are safer. I think that, if anything, a lot of countries that are looking to divide and weaken the United States saw a window of opportunity with what happened in 2016. And so, if anything, we may even see some of that activity increase. And we're not even talking about just Russia now. I think we're talking about lots of countries that see our elections as fair game, and because we haven't taken, and Mitch McConnell hasn't taken basic election security bills up to a vote, because we haven't signed these into law, and our protection and security of our elections into law, I think that we need to be extra vigilant about what we're seeing online. We need to, every time we go on Facebook, you need to question what the source is and what you're seeing, because there's a lot of stuff that's not true going in both directions, and we need to be really careful about the information that we're allowing to inform our vote.
Thank you for watching this video from NBC4 New York. You can subscribe by tapping the button below me, and on the left you can see our latest updates, investigations, and digital exclusives. We'll see you next time.